Now that you've finished grading the carcass, we're going to take it in and we're going to start the fabrication process. That will include cutting the carcass up into the 4 major primals, including the round, the rib, the loin, and the chuck, and the minor subprimals as well. And we'll go through those, and I'll tell you a little bit about where each of those comes from. First, let's start with the forequarter. The 2 major cuts in there are the chuck and the rib, and they would be separated between the 5th and 6th ribs, about in here. So we'd separate the chuck from the rib between the 5th and 6th ribs. We would then separate, if we were going to make a square cut chuck, which is the traditional way of preparing the chuck, we would separate it from the brisket and the foreshank along a line about here. So we'd have a square cut chuck, foreshank, brisket, and then we would have the rib, which would contain 7 ribs. Remember, we cut between the 5th and 6th. There's 12 ribs in the forequarter. And the plate section here. One other cut that you can't see from this side of the carcass that we'll be taking off, and one that most people are familiar with, is the diaphragm that we use for fajitas. And if you look in this area right here, that's the diaphragm, or outside skirt muscle, and it's located here on the inside portion of the carcass. Now that we've gone through the forequarter and the different parts of that, let's spend a little time on the hindquarter. The major primals in the hindquarter are the round and the loin, and we'll find out as we go through the various segments that there's larger muscles in those cuts that have smaller amounts of seam fat in between those than we found when we were looking at the chuck and the rib. But when we start to separate the round from the loin, we'll do that between the 4th and 5th sacral vertebra, just in front of the hip bone, about in this region right here. As we separate those, then we'll have the major or the full cut round and the loin. As we separate the loin, we'll separate that into the sirloin area right here, and the short loin area down below. From the end of the loin, we'll also take the flank